Oh, there you are.
They keep sending me messages. Anyways, it's March 17, 2022, and we have now lived online on Zoom, this group for 2 years.
Oh.
Telling you, we need to really celebrate this. I wanted to say, dear Irene, Rabbi Alex, Joanne, Congregation Shir Shalom, and our special guests, Donna Grace and Mark Goldman. Happy Purim, happy St. Patrick's Day, and welcome to the Buffalo Corner and also to our regulars. And maybe there are a few people here who are here for the first time. So, welcome, all of you, and please return. In case you haven't heard it, I have just launched a new web page designed by the fabulous Jordana Halpern. So please visit if you have a minute. It's
That's good.
www.gunillakester.com. It's the project, it's still in its infancy, and both Jordana and I welcome all your comments, reflections, suggestions. To me, it feels like a community thing. Say, Buffalo Corner is a very large part of this webpage. Now, I hear, am I right, Rabbi Alex, that you have another new book? So I invite you now to tell us about it and read us a poem or two.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing. I had fun during the pandemic, so we have another new book. You can look it up on Amazon. It's about individuals that go above and beyond, like Ganilla and Irene and Joanne and so many people here within our community. I think it's really important at the beginning to really just center where we are on this particular day when we're thinking about both St. Patrick's Day and also Purim. These are holidays about freedom from tyranny. And this is most especially pressing with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. We understand the threat in this world and how freedom can be taken away at a moment's notice. We understand that all too well. By gathering like we are tonight, being together, reading, that is, believe it or not, heretical. And that is beautiful. And I think there are so very limited ways that we can support the people of Ukraine. Being here together and saying that freedom matters and that having discourse in this world is the way to rebuke the authoritarians. And so we are going to continue to do that. We pray for the safety and health of all those involved. Our hearts are very heavy. It's very hard to have our normal life, but I do think we need to, despite or in spite of what's happening in the world. So I wanted to read a simple poem that I wrote last fall. It's called Wherever You Are Heading. And it's about a beautiful day like this one in Western New York. Not everyone's in Western New York here, but wherever you are, I hope it was as beautiful as today. 60 degrees, the kids were out, shorts were out, everything was gorgeous. Everything is nicer on a day like today. So it's called, again, Wherever You Are Heading. The mist slips quickly across the river like a flock of geese. The flock of geese moves gently like a family of ducks. The family of ducks meanders into the middle like falling leaves. The falling leaves sway in the wind like wisps of air. The wisps of air collect in my lungs like sunlight. The sunlight circles the earth searching for the other side. On the other side, my friend nudges me to reclaim her seat. In my new seat, I watch the world unfolding, quiet as the mist. May we all have such beautiful moments in our life, and I am most especially grateful to be here on this Purim St. Patrick's Day in defiance of Putin and all that is evil in this world.
Oh, Rabbi, that was a great example of what I used to teach as a chain link kind of way of writing. You end on one thing and you start on it, and then you end on something else and you start on it. It's beautiful. So thank you so much. That was a good teaching moment for all of us writers to try that again, or for the first time. Now, I would like to welcome my co-host, Irene Simon Cypus. She told me, I sent out this poem by Ilya Kaminsky this morning. Basically, I pulled it together in about 10 minutes before 6 a.m. to just have something. And because he is from Ukraine, and because he is Jewish, and because he writes about war, and then Irene texted me like within 5 minutes and said, I'm bringing his poems to the reading tonight. So, yeah, we both had the same idea. Please, Irene, go ahead. You have to unmute. Irene, you have to unmute yourself, dear.
Yes, now? Okay. Thank you, Ganilla. There's so many poems we could bring tonight, and thank you so much for those words, Rabbi. That was a perfect way to start. And certainly we could read something about Purim. We could have brought an Irish poet, but yeah, all I could also think about was Ukraine. So I'm reading just a little piece from Dancing in Odessa. It's called Traveling Musicians. It's Ilya Kaminsky. In the beginning was the sea. We heard the surf in our breathing, certain that we carried seawater in our veins. A city famous for its drunk tailors, huge mausoleums of rabbis, horse owners, and horse thieves, and most of all for its stuffed and baked fish. In Odessa, language always involved gestures. It was impossible to ask someone for gestures, for directions if their hands were busy. I did ask once. A man was holding 2 huge watermelons, one in each arm. But as I asked more questions, his face grew red and, one watermelon fell on the ground as he attempted to gesticulate through the conversation. He was not disappointed. A man of 50, staring at the juicy watermelon meat right there on the sidewalk. He laughed like the most serious child I ever knew, telling me the story about the country where everyone was deaf. So that speaks to his next book, The Deaf Republic, and to the sense of humor and joy that we see that the people in Ukraine persist in having despite what they're suffering through. So thank you for listening to that. I have a very short poem of my own that's just the opposite. It's about what the rabbi was speaking about on this beautiful day. Taking a chance. We rode our bicycles over the Peace Bridge between Buffalo and Fort Erie, an international crossing. Our destination, Niagara Falls, 40-mile round trip. I carried nothing official. The customs officer asked, no money, no ID? He did let us cross. How easy it was back then, before post-terrorist sanctions, before global pandemic. Of course I knew it was silly to be so unprepared. Did we have a tire pump in case of a flat? Helmets in case of a fall? How free it felt to pedal over the rushing river with just my favorite bicycle partner and 1 tube of lilac lipstick. So, Thank you. Let's, Ganilla, would you now introduce Donna Grace?
You know, we once drove to Toronto, flew with our at that time, very young daughters to LA, and then we had to try to fly back. And they were like, "You have no passports for these daughters. You have no passport." But what do you mean? I said, we were like, I mean, we live, what is it, an hour away? It became a huge international disaster. Luckily, Daniel had a friend here who kind of broke into our house and could make copies of all the documents, send them to us so that we could get on the plane. And I'll never forget standing in front. I mean, in Israel, you know, sometimes people are very strict. And here now in Canada, are you making fun of Canadian immigration? And I was like, no, 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 I'm not making fun of it. Anyways, just because you read the poem, I know exactly how you felt. So now I'm so pleased and happy to introduce our first featured reader, Donna Grace. I think the first time I heard you read was at one of Lynn Shishelsky's Circle Foreman's readings. And there were people sitting around while we were waiting. They were kind of telling me it was your first reading, but when you started reading, I did not believe it because you had such poise, there was intelligence, and all the work you had put into it. So I didn't believe them. But anyways, we are very happy to welcome you at the Buffalo Corner tonight, Donna Grace. She has been a co-host of the Lit Garden Writers Group since 2008 with her husband George. The pandemic inspired her to devote most of her time to reading, writing, and studying poetry. Her work has been included in the Lit Garden Writers Group anthology, and both of the poems she submitted to the Buffalo News poetry page has been published. Her new manuscript, Notes in Isolation, she hopes to have published very soon. So please welcome Donna Grace.
Thank you, Ganilla. And thank you, Irene and Rabbi Alex, Joanne and Shir Shalom for the forum. And I have to say, I am honored to be sharing a feature with our esteemed historian, Mark Goldman. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm going to start with a poem that I should have called Ode to Zoom. It's called The Visitors. I was in the kitchen on the day the earth stood still, baking a lemon tart with a buttery crust, when the aroma from the oven sent me adrift to the long forgotten. Wandering from room to room, I daydreamed of the place I can no longer go, where willows dip their toes in the river next to the no waiting sign. Since I won't be seeing your bouquet of faces anytime soon, chattering behind the window glass, no mob of boots tussling on the welcome mat, no scarves dangling from their wire trapeze, no garlands of melted snowflakes glistening on woolen coats. Instead, I will wait beneath the ticking clock while the house whispers and hums, while the patter of paws descends the wooden staircase, until the phone pings, and there you will be, materializing in liquid crystals, shrink-wrapped from the pixel store, warbling through electroluminescent wires. And this one is called Counting Down. On the Ides of March, under the full moon, we protest the weatherman's false prophecy as a tempest of snowflakes, notorious maidens of melodrama, after melting into each other's arms just days ago, pirouette through the air, throwing themselves in a heap in the yard for another final bow. Of course, they would choose this infamous date for theatrics on the window panes, like the crossword boxes with their flaps open, teasing me with riddles about soothsayers and heartless bulls, as if I don't have anything else on my coffee-stained to-do list, scribbled on the morning newspaper. And this is a poem that was an actual scene on my first morning in Paris. And this was, I was looking out the door, and this is what I saw. It's called Bread and Bisous. If you find yourself in Paris in a room flooded in February sun, with doors that open onto a small balcony, you might view a vignette in front of a boulangerie across the street of two men greeting each other. You know, like those scenes in movies, hugging and cheek kissing to the music of happy words. If one is holding a sack too short for a tall baguette, he tears off a piece and hands it to his friend, and then tears off a piece for himself to nibble as they talk, hands flying like maestros, heads thrown back in laughter as the loaf meets its crusted end. And that too they share equally, keeping the tradition of affectionate partings. After the man with the sack empties the crumbs onto the sidewalk for the pigeons to peck around, he returns to the bakery, emerges with a warm baguette, and stands on the sidewalk, whistling, waiting. And this one is called The Visitor. Although I didn't mind you just dropping by, thanks for giving me time to sew up the holes in my story, close the book on all those half-read magazines, and fluff up the pillows and memories before we redecorated the room with our frame of mind. We fell into conversation, listening to words beyond their meaning, thoughts tucked inside each other like paper airplanes flying between us with no estimated time of arrival. Now that all the bills are paid, the larder stocked, the roof high and dry, the wolf abandoned the door, the cats sleeping in the window, and all there is to count is a house full of blessings and pens full of ink. I don't know if anyone listens to Mark Maron's podcast, but his girlfriend died at the beginning of the pandemic of a rare blood disorder. And she was a well-loved director and person, you know, in movie making industry. And and with all the sadness going on around us, I just was moved to write this poem. It's called Magic Bullets. Doped up on placebos and magic cure-alls, I carry on with bravado, dreaming backwards of sepia photographs in gilded picture frames to a time when hunger was the diet plan. Waking to relentless losses, I wandered, stymied for a solution, telling myself stories that once you live inside your heartbreak, you might settle into it and it into you, like warm slippers and a cozy bathrobe on frosty mornings. But while you stand there, wrapped in a towel, dripping with grief, looking through the darkness for hope and redemption. Life moves on without your permission. And this was one of the poems that R.D. Paul published, called Dreams and Distractions. Time was, a map was a thing to be done with after the trip, a crumpled chart of memories in food stains, coffee rings, inked in routes, circled landmarks, off the beaten paths, telephone numbers, random notes, and a confusion of creases that served as the official record of every failed attempt at refolding. I look up from my map reading to watch the cat on a reconnaissance mission behind the gossamer curtain, eyeing the trio of blue candles next to the window where prisms from the blue crystal suncatcher dance on the wall. The car sits in the driveway, our suitcases gather dust in the closet, and next to the atlas, tall spines of travel guides and crossword puzzles lean against the wall in their starched uniforms, waiting for the service bell. And I'm going to read this poem that I wrote for my father that was published a couple of years ago in Buffalo News. My father is somewhat of a muse for me from time to time. And I wrote this one. It's called Men of Steel. I barely remember the melancholy face of my father, who will soon be dead more years than he lived, standing alone nearby through a thicket of leggy pokeweed, while his two brothers, who lived to grow old, linger in the distance, hands in pockets, steel-toe boots kicking up memories, sharp, shiny splinters of a disintegrated Irish family. I no longer wonder why I searched for my father through old photographs of steel mills, for the arrangement of machinery. Feel the searing heat oozing sweat from every pore in the open hearth that took 40 years to grind him down. Somewhere between blood-soaked shirts on the picket line and last call at Curly's gin mill, he dreamed in aquamarine of golf games at sunrise, swan dives at sunset, cradled in a hammock on a palm tree beach until his time would drift to a stop. And this one is called Turning. In the early evening, when my boots grow weary, I return to the warmth of my solitary room, fragrant with white hyacinth in a glass vase, a bowl of peaches from last summer's harvest. My woolen coat, caught in a snowstorm, left to drip on the tile floor. Without the discipline of schedules, the walls of structure fall away, inviting a luxury of sitting a spell while the past, with its liquid ghosts, appears and disappears along the waterways of memory. Should a quote by a famous author happen by, I won't be long before yardsticks from the Ministry of Measurements show up in starched shirts and bow ties to chastise me for all the books I failed to read. I wonder if I will be more or less after interrogating myself under a bare light bulb, like a burrowing detective that only years of silence might answer. Without beating deadlines or running down clocks, just aimless walks, slow food, and fruitful questioning. painting with music. Colorless clouds erase every breath of blue. Ivory hydrangea blossoms over winter in a velvety blend of clove and cinnamon, climb over aging cedar lattice, casting lavender shadows on fractured asphalt. The wind, a bored adolescent, pelts the windows with raindrops, while you clang a metal spatula against an iron skillet. Whatever you've got sizzling in there teases me with aromas I can't yet name. Dabbing the floor with his paws, the cat sings the musical poetry in ancient rhythms of a tradition that he's been carrying around for 2,000 years and still remembers how to play. Drowned out by its loud, dissonant music of heartbeats, the whole planet comes and goes, thumping with life, except the flowers dangling over the sides of the vase and the fly lying on its back on the windowsill. The cup. I think of you as I write this in one of those handmade books you gave me, when with each giving you said, so you will always have something to write on. Stick pens and ballpoints kick back until the next flourish of words hit the page, until all the pages are filled with doodles and any random thoughts I managed to snag as they hurried by. Green dog-eared bookmark from the last bookstore standing in the city village lean against the brim, reminding me to buy a book now and then, next year's calendar, a magazine or two, greeting cards for every occasion, for friends to discover in their post box that they might open with an index finger or slice along the crease with something sharp, like the metal hairpin engraved with a cherub holding a flower I found among my grandmother's things, with a 50-year-old secret neatly wrapped inside on the page of a small town newspaper, where drawings of leather luggage, hats, and fine clothing dangle under the banner of a haberdashery bearing her name. How am I doing for time? Okay. I lived in Arizona years ago, and sometimes I think about it in the middle of the blizzards that we're having here. And I call this one February. Lying on a porch swing under the shade of the blue Palo Verde tree in sun-washed Arizona, I disappeared into the pages of War and Peace to live among the Russian aristocrats under winter's icy cloak, looking up from my book only long enough to echo the hellos of passing neighbors at the end of dog leashes with hot off the press newspapers tucked under their arms. I remember those Russian scenes as the landscape outside my window changes from a barroom brawling blizzard before settling into silent, satiny drifts, where snowflakes drowse with twinkling eyes, irresistible to frolicking dogs, and a mighty army of tiny workers build a squadron of plump, pipe-smoking snowmen who feign suave and breezy attitudes while guarding castles against Napoleonic hordes. How distant that summery February is to me now, as I look out at the ash tree extending an olive branch to a dispassionate sky, where red lights atop cell towers glimmer like rubies in a celestial tiara of the Empress Consort, the moon, an elegant pendant nestled in the hollow of the horizon. And this one is called Workshop, and it's no reflection on my Lit Garden workshop people who are so kind. Workshop.
Yes.
People.
This has to be the last one now,
Oh, okay. All right.
just for time's sake.
Okay. Workshop. People show up by the dozen to rake the dead leaves out of my poems, round them out with hedge trimmers, finish rough edges with pinking shears, and leave them to bleed out in red ink. They ask, "What's your point?" Or "What are you trying to say here?" The same questions I pose in front of paintings at the Museum of Modern Art, words tumbling out in ordered chaos. Subject, noun, verb, a few articles, a dash of metaphor for code talkers to decipher. Words that rouse you from bed, full to bursting of sweet promise, to pour onto the page. Light or heavy, organic, homogenized, skimmed, to be served at breakfast in a bowl of rhyming couplets. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Donna. You gave us a history lesson in preparation, I think, for Mark Goldman, but in a very different way, because you talked about your ancestors, your father. I was also grateful in a way, and I think it's really true for most of us here that we feel validated by R.D. Poe, and when he publishes our poems. I remember the first time he published mine, which is a long time ago now, but it was like, wow! It was my first and second poem written in English, so it meant a lot to me. But yeah, this is history, it's local, it's personal, and it goes way back in generations. So thank you, Donna. And now, Irene,
Yes.
you
Am I
will
unmuted?
Mark Goldman, please.
Okay. Thank you, Camilla. Am I unmuted? And okay. Well, Mark Goldman sent me some words, something like this: that Mark was born in New York City, that he came to Buffalo to attend graduate school at UB, where he earned a doctorate in history. He stayed in Buffalo, where he raised a family, built a career as an historian, and as a business owner. He created a home, and he says he's happy that he did. So I'd like to add that we are happy that he did. And the book that he will be reading a bit from, I think, tonight, City of My Heart, has been described as a Valentine to Buffalo. I could also say that in the context of this evening, it's a poem to Buffalo. I just want to add a few more words about Mark and what he's done, although I think that we're all well aware. I'm taking some words from the back of this book. Mark's work as a historian, a teacher, as the creator of the Calumet's Arts Cafe and the Allen Street Hardware Cafe, in addition to his extensive engagement in some of the most important public policy debates of our times in the city, has provided him with unique insights into our history. In fact, those policy debates have far-reaching scope outside of our area itself. They speak to what's going on across the country. In addition to detailed accounts of Black Rock, the Italian West Side, South, Irish, and North Buffalo, and Central Park, the book discusses the origins of the preservation movement, the Buffalo school desegregation case, the story of Chippewa Street, and the Calumet Arts Cafe, the Bass Pro controversy, and so much more. It's my pleasure to welcome Mark Goldman, who's contributed so much to our city and to our lives personally as a great Mark.
Irene, I can barely hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
we
very
can hear
well.
you.
Oh, great. Well, thanks so much for having me, Irene. Thanks for asking me. I appreciate it very much. I just wanted to kind of start off by saying I'm not a poet. And but to a kind of parody Bob Dylan, at least I know it, which is good. And so I don't make any pretense of being a poet. Although I think, listening to some of your poems, I think I do have poetic intentions in writing this book. I was very, very conscious of language and very conscious of trying to create a narrative style that aspired, at times anyway, to poetry. So I don't really know what poetry is exactly, but it's a very, very self-conscious awareness of the use of language, and I tried very hard to be very clear, to aspire to specifically, if not poetic, but sort of aspirational language. So you guys, if you want, read it, and you can tell me if I have realized any of those aspirations, or if that's just a vain hope. Anyway, the book is a journey, really. You know, it ain't the Odyssey, but it's a journey, and it's my journey in Buffalo. It's written in the first person, and it's conceptually rooted in one of the Old Testament prophets, Jeremiah, who wrote this amazing piece. I'll just read very, very briefly. What do I have, 20 minutes, you say?
Yeah.
So Jeremiah, who here knows who Jeremiah is? Probably, I'm sure Rabbi Lazarus knows who he is, right? It was in 600 BC. It was 600 BC, and the Jews in Judea were uprooted from their homeland by the Babylonians, and it was what was called the Babylonian captivity, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The Jews of Judea were captured, taken to Babylon, where they lived in exile for a period of about, I'm not sure, 300 or 400 years. So that would be, so let's just say it's 300 years. It would be like 1720 for us today. And Jeremiah talked to these people, and he kind of was giving them encouragement or giving them advice as to what to do. And this is what he said, and I quote this in the book. This is what Jeremiah said: build houses and settle down. Do you folks familiar with this passage? Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Well, I kind of read that, and I came, I wasn't captive. I was not nobody took me away, but I left my hometown of New York, where I'd been born and raised, and my family lived and came here, and I found his advice extremely compelling and suitable, really, to my own life experience here in Buffalo. So I quote that, and then I write here. Jeremiah was right. Embrace your new home. Unravel its past. Improve its present. Plan for its future. Jump in. Get dirty. Live. Learn. Love. Over the course of more than half century that I've lived in Buffalo, my faith in Jeremiah's advice has been generously realized and abundantly fulfilled. My commitment to this place, to Buffalo, has led not only to my own personal transformation, but to the transformation of the city itself. And it continues. It's very hokey. It's kind of a sentimental, as Irene said, a Valentine's card. It's a sentimental view of my life in Buffalo. Jeremiah's advice has worked for me, and it's worked for my children and my grandchildren. They too, Charlotte, Eli, Max, Charlie, Lydia, Jonathan, who now lives in Brooklyn, have deep and lasting ties that bind them to Buffalo, a place where they know that, like me, they will never be alone. Buffalo is the city of their hearts, as it is the city of mine. Well, that's the epilogue, but that is kind of the theme that runs through this book. Is it's basically how this guy, namely me, found a home in a place in which he was a stranger. And it sort of, I've been here over 50 years now. It's sort of, I mean, I guess you could say it's self-indulgent. It follows my life's journey, if you will, from the time I arrived here in 1967 to, it goes through the pandemic. The last chapter is something I call the Healing Heart, Buffalo 2020, which covers the spring and summer of 2020. So each chapter refers to a different aspect of my life here. So for those of you who are interested in Jewish issues, I have a chapter here called Next Year in Jerusalem. And the subtitle is What? A New Yorker Finds His Jewish Identity and Where? Buffalo. So this is kind of a personal journey of how I, who was raised in a totally, I was raised in a totally irreligious background. And I mean, I remain largely religious, but I discovered a great deal about my Jewish identity, not in New York, but here in Buffalo, as a function of wrestling with identity issues as a Jew in a largely not a Gentile environment. So there's a chapter on that. I was fascinated by South Buffalo. I spent months in South Buffalo in 2019, and I wrote a chapter here called Discovering the Power of Faith, Family, and Friendship in South Buffalo. And the subtitle there is, in South Buffalo, I learned you are never alone. Then there's a chapter, it's called The Enchanted Landscape of North Buffalo and Central Park, which is an elegiac view of a section of the city where my daughter and her family live. And it's a view of this part of town through my experiences as being a parent and a grandparent. So this is no means a traditional history. I gave a talk at the history department in the UB the other day, and this is not the kind of a book it's not a scholarly book in any way. It's an interesting book, and it casts a lot of, it's filled with insights about events in the history of the past 50 years of the city of Buffalo, but it's not scholarly. It's not rooted in social science technique or documentation. It comes from my own experiences, and the professor said, well, a lot of up here we're upset that you don't talk about the role of the developers and this and that, and in the role of poverty and all the. I said, that's not my job. I'm not here to document the difficulties and challenges of the city of Buffalo. The purpose of the book was to highlight the aspects of living in Buffalo that I find to be inspiring and aspirational. So if somebody's looking for, kind of a critique of downtown development or, an essay on the maldistribution of resources, that's not what I do here. It's not that I don't recognize that these are realities in our daily life, but that I don't see that as my work. I see as my work in an effort to present the wholesome aspects of living in the city. And that's, I was talking to these students at UB, and yeah.
Mark, would you read some of it, please, for us?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I don't know. There's a lot here. There's two.
You read whatever you want. We want to hear your writing also.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, great. Good idea. Thanks. Well, so I wrote a lot about places. I wrote a lot about people. I see Karima's here. I wrote about how urban renewal impacted her neighborhood on the 7th Street in the west side of Buffalo, and used one of her poems about growing up there. In fact, used one of her family photographs. You know, I found that by using something personal like Karima's poem and her photograph, I bring the personal to it puts a personal light on the historical time. I don't know. Wait, yeah. So,
Well,
one of my, I'm sorry.
no, go
Want me to
ahead.
read
Mark.
it?
While you're looking, I was going to say that I hope everybody does have this book or buys this book, and there are beautiful photographs too that enrich the
Yeah,
story.
and the photographs are not, but their photographs are kind of like a family album. I mean, these are photographs of me and doing things in Buffalo. It's my family doing stuff in Buffalo. It's I have a whole chapter on the school desegregation case that deals with people who I knew at the time. All right, I'll read one of my favorite pieces. I'm real good friends. I don't know how many of you know. Who here knows Joan Bozer? Does anybody know Joan Bozer? Are you folks from Buffalo, most of you? Oh, I don't know if you can hear me anymore, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Joan Bozer. I'll read about Joan Bozer. So Joan Bozer. Hello?
That's okay.
Can you hear?
I was just saying that Joan Bozer was very instrumental in getting the carousel downtown.
Yeah. So Joan Bozer is, for the last 50 years, has been active in all, the kinds of things that the wholesome aspects of life in Buffalo. She was very critical in the creation of the Olmsted Parks Conservancy. She was an assemblywoman who was first fought hardest for preservation. She was really responsible for the transformation of the public library into the post office, rather, into Erie County Community College. And so I talked to Joan. She's an old friend of mine. I actually just saw her last night. And here's a picture of her. I wanted a picture of Joan in here. But you know what she looks like. But this is I'll just briefly read this because this is my approach to the whole book. Joan was not from Buffalo, from outside of New York in Westchester County. And she met a guy here who became her fiance, whose name was Joan Bozer. And John lived on what was then Humboldt Parkway. This was in the early 1950s, before Humboldt Parkway. You all know that before the Kensington Expressway was there was a parkway. Are you all familiar with Humboldt Parkway? Where do you people live? What? Irene's the only person who knows about Humboldt Parkway. What's going on? Anyway.
I live two blocks over from Humboldt Parkway.
All right, so you know the story. Anyway, so Joan is coming to visit her, God damn it. Joan's coming to visit her fiance, Joan Bozer, who lives on Humboldt Parkway. So, Joan becomes a lifelong...
Passage. That's a nice passage, Mark.
Yeah, I want to find it. 162. Sorry.
While you're waiting, if I could interject, there's a wonderful mural by Max Collins on Northrop, and it's Humboldt Parkway as it was and Humboldt Parkway as it is now, kind of fading away. So as the new one, the modern Humboldt Parkway with the expressway kind of flakes away, and you see the green of what the parkway looked before the expressway was put in. It's really worth worth going
Where's
to
this
see.
mural, Karima?
It's
Here, oh,
on
that sounds
Northland.
great.
on
Okay,
Northland.
thank
Northland.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's Joan Bozer. So here's my effort to
We need
reach it,
to
you know, my
listen to Mark because you have
my
about 10
poetic
minutes.
aspiration. No one more than Joan Bozer has been Buffalo's undisputed champion of historic preservation.
Yeah.
Starting with her Herculean efforts to transform the post office, continuing with her pivotal role in the creation of the Buffalo Homestead Conservancy, and her passionate and ongoing efforts to bring renewable energy to Western New York, Joan's role has been transcendent. So here it is. When I asked her years later why she'd become so involved in these issues, she told me the story of her first visit to Buffalo, one she made to visit her fiance John's family in 1951. John had picked her up at the airport, she recalls, and drove her home to visit his parents, who lived on Meadowview Place, which is right off of Agassiz Circle. Their route, she distinctly recalled, was down and over the Humboldt Parkway. Driving slowly down this tree-lined parkway filled with kids on bikes, couples walking, and even a cluster of people on horseback, she was thrilled. It's an Olmsted Park, her fiance John told her, you know, the same fellow who built Central Park. That evening, from the Bozer home overlooking Agassiz Circle, Joan called her parents. When they asked her how she liked Buffalo, she replied, tears filling in her eyes, "It's the most beautiful city I've ever seen." So I was able to take that little vignette, which I picked up in the interview. One of my strengths as a writer is I think that I find a little nugget and can build on it. I heard her tell me that story, and I said, "There, that's poetry in motion." I took that. So there's those kinds of, I was very taken with a lot of people. A guy I also was quite involved with, of course, was Joe Giambra. And many of you, I'm sure at least Irene and Karima know Joe Giambra and Dave. But there's, I wrote about him. I got personally involved with Judge Curtin, who was the federal district judge who presided over the school desegregation case. So that's what I try to do is intersperse people's stories with my story and historical events. So those three things come together to create a narrative.
And it's a beautiful tapestry, Mark, the way you've woven it together. It's a very
With Joan Bozer.
With Joan Bozer, with everybody. It's a unique telling, a unique portrait. It really is that you've drawn.
Yeah, well, I could go. I got basically you all know Robert Caro, who, when he was writing the 6-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson, moved to East Texas for about a year. And my kids kidded me. They said, "Dad, you should just rent a cottage in South Buffalo," because I was going down there endlessly for about 6 months. And I was fascinated about what I was learning there about how, through talking to people, just basically hanging out, which is what I like to do anyways. Dave and Irene will tell you. I just like hanging out and talking to people and listening to them and picking up on their stories. And so don't ever invite me into your living room if you want to preserve your privacy. So that's what I did in South Buffalo, and it was extraordinary. I met a guy who opened a bookshop, and a woman who ran the Irish Center, and a kid who is the bartender at Blackthorn, and all of these, and a guy who was an expert on who's buried in Holy Cross Cemetery. And by talking to these people, picking out, the good stories, and having a good editor like Irene who can separate the wheat from the chaff, with any luck, you come up with a narrative that has poetic aspirations, if you will.
Well, so, I know that we're closing in on our time, but I'd like to say, as someone who's lived in Buffalo my whole life, that I certainly remember the times when that was an embarrassment almost, and we would say, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Buffalo."
Yeah.
Mark has done so much to turn that mindset around. I mean, you were an originator. There are many people who have since contributed, but before I
Right.
knew you personally, it was just so wonderful to have somebody come to Buffalo with so much vision and energy from New York City, where we all wished we lived, and contribute and do what you have done, uncovering these stories and through your much of, everything, music at the Calumet and next to the Calumet and the original tours of Buffalo that you gave and your teachings and your courses and your many books. And this is just
You're
the
sweet.
latest. So
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Irene. Thank you all for having me. I very much appreciate it. And I love listening to your poems.
We'll come back.
We
Thank you.
usually, at the end of having our featured readers, we usually invite questions and if anybody has any, want to ask any of the featured readers or, have some comments, now is the time. If you'd like. Yes.
Irene, when did you write the poem about the bike ride?
Why or when?
No, when?
Very recently, and I guess thinking about borders and thinking about freedom. And it's such a
Right.
little piece. It's just about
Discretion.
a bicycle, but there's, wow, that was another world.
And I love the poem that's about Donna. How long ago did your father die, Donna, before you wrote that poem?
My father died in 1969 when I was 20
my
years old. So I never really got to know him as an adult. But, George and I George worked at the steel plant, and George and he went on a photo trip through the steel plant just recently. And I had no idea that when I went in there, all these feelings about my father came flooding back. So, yeah, he
You
died.
might wanna.
Yeah.
You might
I-
wanna, oh,
He
excuse
died.
me.
He died of the exposure to uranium.
Uranium, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. They didn't
All right.
protect the workers at Bethlehem Steel. Yeah.
I see Jan has a question you want to ask?
Yeah, well, it's kind of an anecdote for Mark, but you may have something to say about it. You may have heard similar things. My father, who worked at Roswell, had a medical trip to Lübeck, Germany, which is very far north, considered almost Scandinavian at the time by the Germans. And we, on our last day there, which was a Saturday, we were looking for gifts for people. We didn't realize the stores close early, but we were in Lübeck is supposed to have the best marzipan in Europe or whatever, so in the world. So we gave everyone marzipan. But I think we were standing somewhere in the city, and I said, "My God, Dad, this looks just like Humboldt Parkway. I feel like I'm right in Buffalo." And he, and he explained that Buffalo, I knew growing up here that Buffalo had a lot of Polish, community, had a big Polish community, but I did not realize until that moment how much of it was shaped by the German community as well. And I'm guessing that's why it looks so much like Lübeck, like Germany.
Yeah, I've known that. Interesting.
And now, then I started to look at Buffalo differently. It's like, oh, of course, the Sholkoffs, the rats, and et cetera, et cetera. Actually, I'm not sure if rats, but,
A lot of Germans, right.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you, Mark, if I may, as a historian, like, how do you pick the stories, the facts, the perspective? Like, as a poet, I feel a freedom to put things together the way I want to, but when you are a historian, it's a little different, right?
Oh, yeah, I think that's I approach it exactly the same way. I think that I would never get a job at a real history department. I just wouldn't, because I worked for years at Empire State, and I see Regina there. Empire State is perfect for academics who don't really know what they want to do, because you can do pretty much anything. And I could, I don't fit into the slot. I'm not scholarly enough. I'm interested in scholarship, and I love reading other people's, but I am drawn to stories. And one of my favorite historians is somebody who's not well received in academic circles. Is a guy like David McCullough. So that my approach is, I look for the story and do justice to the story. I don't, but I look for the interesting. That's what poets do, probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I know I'm not a poet. Bob Dylan, I'm a poet, and I know it. I just don't show it. I'm not a poet. I know it, and I clearly don't show it. So. Anyway.
Well, I might disagree. The more we're talking about this, yes, you're way in. The City of My Heart, is that a poetic title or what, everybody? That's the title of this book. That's not a very sociological academic title. The City of My Heart,
right.
Poetry, Mark.
Right. Thank you very much. Irene, you're a sweetheart. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you wanted to ask a question?
Oops.
Regina? You are muted.
Okay, I think
Yeah, you're good.
okay. I unmuted myself. Okay, so I wanted to compliment both Donna and Mark. I liked your poetry, Donna, very much. And my parents lived in Paris for a long time. And as it happens, had a little balcony and there was a bakery right across. So that poem captured the atmosphere of Paris for me so powerfully that I want to thank you. It brought all kinds of memories almost instantly. And Mark was my former colleague at Empire State College. And I wanted to say that you don't have to apologize for the way you wrote this book, because I think that the new trend in history now is that there is more domestic information, cooking information, not just facts and battles, but also, history has opened itself to the personal. Yes. Yes. So congratulations. And I am glad that you are supporting and promoting the reputation of the city I love as well.
Thank you very much. Did anybody else have anything you wanted to ask or add or question or comment on?
Well, if I may chime in here, I lived on North Parade and for about 6 months, and I used to practically live in the Museum of Science. So when they started digging, I was living in the Kentfield projects, and they took away our green space to run the 33 by Kensington High School. So I'm very familiar with that. It broke my heart when they did all that to make sure that suburbanites could get back out to the wonderful green pastures of suburbia and leave the city emptied out pretty much of anybody with money, let's say, commerce. It was it was quite a mistake.
It was a terrible mistake. My family was heartbroken too.
Yeah.
I used to go to St. Augustine's Church in high school as a tutor to the kids in the neighborhood, and I would just marvel at the beauty of Humboldt Park.
Where did you live, Irene?
Well, I didn't live in the neighborhood, but I would in high school. I don't know how it came about, but somehow I became a volunteer tutor at St. Augustine's Church on Humboldt Parkway.
Oh, okay.
Going there, yeah.
Do you remember Deaconess Hospital?
Sure. Yeah.
That was
Talking
great.
about, and that's what Mark really. I mean, there was the period, I guess, of some very beautiful. I mean, we could go on and on. The original downtown library, the things that we are so sad that we're not respected and that we're devastated that we're
Yeah, right.
destroyed. But there was that beautiful, I guess, when the 50s, the 60s is that Buffalo. And then the 70s, there was so much
Right.
renewal. And
Right.
then Mark comes in the 80s and begins to open people's eyes to what was and what could have been and what still could be if we put our minds to it and our brains.
I just, oh, I'm sorry. I just had a
Thank
quick,
you, Irene. And I want everybody to know George Grace over here, who is speaking so well
And
about
George made the beautiful paintings that we see behind Donna.
Yeah, and I want you to know you should look him up because his paintings are unbelievable. And
If I do say so myself. Thank you. Thank
And
you. I'm very
they
when
flattered.
we have another open reading again at Temple, I hope you will bring a lot of them for people to see.
George's paintings evoke that urban scenery and that urban feel, the grittiness and the beauty.
That's history. I mean,
Thank
that has
you.
been the theme. I wasn't really understanding when we put these two
Forward.
feature readers together what we would get, but it's really fabulous. So thank you all so much. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say? Yes, Jen?
Jan?
oh, I'm sorry. Anne Marie, why don't you go first? Because I already spoke.
I just have a brief comment, and that is when I think about the disappearance of Humboldt Parkway and any number of other things in Buffalo, I think there's a culprit who came to town and its name is Progress. And I'm still blaming Progress for a lot of things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was going to say, I'm sure, I'm guessing many of you know the NPR show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Which is coming here April 28th. Finally, they rescheduled. They were supposed to come before the pandemic, during the pandemic. And I once heard Peter Sagal, the host, not that long ago, someone called in and they were from Buffalo. And he made a typical, if I may say so, and I love Peter Sagal, but an ignorant crack, about like, oh, my condolences or something like that. So now that he's coming, I wanted to just drop him a line. I can't, both because I'm not the person to do it, but also, it would take too long to tell him everything, the whole history. But I just want to drop him a note and point out that we have many of the same architects as his beloved Chicago. I won't put it that way. And that Buffalo has a lot of surprises. It's amazingly cultural, has really good cultural history.
That's right.
Does anyone, like Mark, you'd probably be a good person. Do you suggest I direct him? I mean, he certainly, I'm sure, has a research staff, but is there any particular source I should direct him to if he wants?
On what topic in particular?
Well, just to kind of get an understanding of how amazing Buffalo is in many ways.
Yeah, you could read one of my books, we're going to say.
True.
Oh,
Right.
True.
I'm
Yep.
surprised he doesn't
I
realize
haven't read,
by now.
I mean, the most comprehensive view of 20th century Buffalo is a book I wrote called City on the Edge. It came out in 2008 or 9.
Yeah.
uh-huh.
Mhm.
Great.
It deals with all of the things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That
send
was
him
more
a link.
traditional narrative. That was more narrative history, that's third person history.
Yeah, send him a link to it and some photos. I would do.
Send them a link.
Send him a link and some of the pictures from Buffalo, photos of the buildings.
Yeah.
I think it's not such a secret anymore. And one of the only downsides of that is that it's very hard to afford a house in Buffalo anymore.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
Right.
it's gone out of
That's
sight.
true.
What we thought of as
What's
comfortable, middle
terrible.
class, not fancy neighborhoods are unattainable. So
Right.
it's not
Right.
a
That's
secret.
true everywhere, I think, after the pandemic.
Maybe, but I think it really, there started to be so many articles in the New York Times, people come to Buffalo, look at the architecture, look at the history. So we're very proud of that.
Look how cheap these gorgeous old houses are.
Exactly. So now they aren't. Yeah.
This is a slight exaggeration, but 15 years ago, you could buy a whole block for about $10,000.
Right.
No longer, no longer. You sell your house at a profit, you have nowhere to live. You can't afford the next house.
If we don't have more questions, I hope that Gunilla will speak a little bit about what's coming up in April.
Yes, yes.
And when? What's the next date?
So next date, actually, I don't know. It's April, whatever it is, the
Yeah.
third Thursday of
Thursday,
April.
yeah,
It
yeah.
might be the 22nd. I
It
actually
is April 21st.
Okay.
Yeah, Joanne posted it,
Yeah.
April 21st.
Whoever wants to get on the email list to get these things from me, that's all I send out has to do with the Buffalo Corner. If you send me your email, I'm Gunilla at the Kesters, my last name, .net. I'm also online. I have a new web page. You can find me through that. I'm the only Gunilla Kester in all of the United States. So don't worry, you can find me. But if you want to, I don't put anybody on any lists unless I am asked to. So if like I see you nodding there, and I don't. Oh, sorry, Regina. If you would like, for example, to be on the list, either email your friend who is here to send it to me, or send it straight to me, and I'll make sure you get them.
Thank you.
And next month, as you know, April is National Poetry Month. So it has been our tradition at the Buffalo Corner to host an open reading where anybody who writes or doesn't write can come, bring one or two short poems, either one you yourself wrote or something you love from somebody else. And I've heard, I complained to my doctor the other day that my kids say I'm growing deaf. And he said, "Do you hear this?" And I had to confess I heard it. He said, "Selective hearing." Anyways, there is a little bit of a movement now that maybe will be in person at the synagogue for April.
Oh, wow.
Which
Great.
would be great. So we have 3 things going on before we usually take the summer off. But we have in April a National Poetry Month, and it's up to all of you to bring stuff to read. All of us. I will bring something too, of course. And then in May, it's our annual mystery night, hosted by Gary L. Ross and his special guests who come from New York City, Pittsburgh, Niagara Falls, you name it. Whether we do it by Zoom or we do it in person, I don't know yet. And then in June, we have what we call a repeat offender, Catherine Hastings, who has asked if she could bring her own co-featured reader. So we don't know who that is yet. And I guess it depends on whether it's going to be in person or on Zoom. So it's all a little bit up in the air. So I'll keep you posted. Get your name on my list. You'll have all the information. But please join us. Yeah.
I want to give 2 more little plugs. Okay, may I?
Oh, of course.
One is that Gunilla has had a great many poems published in a very short time recently. So I want to congratulate Gunilla on that achievement. And you didn't get to read anything tonight, so
Oh,
you
I am
in
going
April.
to.
Oh, you're going to? Okay, I have one more plug then, which is please, since we're more out and about, Just Buffalo has initiated, if you look at different bus shelters around the city, it's lovely to see big, oh, and well, mostly the city. I mean, sort of the outskirts. My daughter's is at Genesee and Union.
Oh, wow.
I have one at Summer and Elmwood. There are many, many poems, and that's also a nice thing since we're talking about urban, wonderful, more creative things to do. And, you know, instead of just looking at a big ad for a bathtub, there are, I don't know how many poets who have poems around the city. So check that out if you're out and about. And good, Ganilla, we'll hear from you then to close.
I just wanted to share one poem since we are doing history tonight.
Good.
I feel like it's in a sense rooted in my family history, and I just wrote it this week. But I did read Irene's poem. Somebody photographed it. It was Teresa Pagens, and so on Facebook I could read it, and it was great. So yeah, that's a fantastic community
It is, it's
response.
a nice, and yes, I see, Ganilla is going to read, that's how we're closing tonight. Good, I thought somehow.
I
we'd
will
lost-
just read, since we have gone over a little bit of time, I'll just read one poem I wrote this week. It's called Letters Home. We cook now the ancient way in an iron kettle, black and heavy, hanging over the open fire, like my grandmothers and their mothers did. We put in it whatever we find: potatoes, rutabaga, turnip, parsnip, carrot, Swede. They laugh at the name and me when they add the Swede. So tough and dry, won't break for nothing, hard to digest. We finally cooked old Christina when she stopped laying eggs. We hid bricks in the fire and stick them under our skirts. Did you know your great-grandmother spent a night tied to the stockade in front of the church for stealing bread so she could feed her sons? I think I must give you the ornate antique silver spoon my mother gave me the night before my wedding. It's the last valuable thing left in this house besides my kettle and memories. It's large but supple. You can hang it on a leather thong around your neck to hide it inside your shirt. I found some fallen apples, bruised, under your birthday tree, but left them on the ground. Some knowledge we just can't live with. I wonder how many people we have never met and yet remember. Like your mother, who stood in the food lines after the Second War and heard comments such as, they had too many holes left in those chimneys. Twice now I have dreamt that you came in quietly behind me, following. Starling shadow, what does that mean? Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you to Ganilla and Irene for having me. It was great.
Thank you, Donna.
Yes, thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you for
so
hosting
Mark.
this.
Yeah.
And for
great.
everybody, and I hope to see you next month.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do email me if you have any concerns or you want to get on board.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm. Um, what happens? Oh dear, I can't get out. Exit, minimized.